Richard Calloway grabbed the IV stand next to his son's bed and hurled it across the room. Glass shattered. Monitors crashed to the floor. Two nurses screamed and stumbled backward. His 6-year-old twins, Elena and Marcus, lay dying of leukemia, and the last experimental treatment had just failed. Every doctor, every clinic, every million he'd spent useless. He had 14 days, maybe less. Then a black woman with no medical degree, no credentials, and no invitation walked into his house and said 5 words that made a billionaire fall to his knees. But what she was hiding, what she carried in her heart, would change everything. Before we begin, drop a comment and tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you haven't already, subscribe and hit that bell, because sometimes, when everything feels over, that's exactly when the miracle walks through the door. Richard Calloway hadn't slept in 4 days. He stood in the medical wing of his Connecticut estate, his hand pressed flat against the wall to keep himself upright, staring at 2 hospital beds that shouldn't exist in a home. His twins Elena and Marcus lay motionless under white sheets, tubes running from their arms, monitors, beeping in a rhythm that sounded like a countdown. Elena's eyes were closed. Her skin was so pale he could see the veins in her eyelids. She was 6 years old, and she weighed 38 pounds. Marcus lay in the bed beside her, facing the wall. He hadn't spoken in 11 days, not to his father, not to the nurses, not to anyone. He just lay there, curled into himself, like he was already practicing being gone. Richard's phone buzzed. He looked at it. Dr. Alan Chambers. He answered. "Richard, I got the results from the last panel." And a pause. That pause. The one doctors give you when they've run out of ways to dress up the truth. The targeted therapy isn't responding. Her counts are worse than last week. His are holding, but barely. Richard closed his eyes. "What does that mean, Alan, in plain English?" "It means we've exhausted the options I'm comfortable recommending." "Then recommend the ones you're not comfortable with." "Richard, I have $46 billion. You're telling me I can't buy my children another month." Chambers was quiet for a long time. Then softly, 2 weeks. Maybe 3. I'm sorry." Richard hung up. He didn't throw the phone. He didn't yell. He just stood there staring at his children and felt the ground beneath him turn to nothing. He walked to Marcus's bed, reached out. His hand hovered over his son's shoulder, trembling. He wanted to touch him, wanted to say something, anything that a father should say in a moment like this. But he couldn't, because every time he touched them, every time he got close, he felt Catherine, his wife, their mother, dead 3 years from the same disease that was now eating their children alive. And that feeling, that memory of holding someone you love while they disappear, it paralyzed him. He pulled his hand back. He walked out of the room. He locked himself in his office, sat at his desk, and started making calls. Zurich, Tokyo, Berlin. A clinic in Seoul that claimed a 92% remission rate with a new protocol. He called them all. Begged. Demanded. Wired money before they even agreed. None of it would matter. But Richard Calloway didn't know how to do anything else. He'd built an empire by refusing to accept defeat. So he kept dialing, kept fighting the only way he knew how, with money, with power, with control, while his children lay dying 2 floors below, wondering why their father never came to say goodnight. The next morning, Mrs. Whitfield knocked on his office door at 7:15 a.m. "Mr. Calloway, the new applicant is here." Richard didn't look up from his laptop. "What applicant?" "For the caretaker position. You approved the posting last week." He had, vaguely. The last 3 hires, all trained pediatric nurses, had quit within days. One lasted 48 hours. She said the house felt like a hospice and she couldn't take the silence. "Send her in." He expected another nurse. Scrubs, clipboard, practiced sympathy. What he got was Grace Mbeki. She stood in his doorway, 31 years old, dark skin, simple clothes, no folder, no resume in hand. She wasn't tall, but she filled the space in a way he couldn't explain. like she'd walked through something terrible and come out the other side still standing. "Mr. Calloway," she said. Her voice was calm, not soft, calm. "There's a difference." "You have nursing experience?" he asked without looking up. "No." That made him look up. "No. I'm not a nurse. I'm applying for the caretaker position. My children have stage 4 leukemia. They need medical care, not a housekeeper. They have nurses for that, 3 of them from what I understand, and none of them lasted." Richard leaned back. "So what makes you think you will—" Grace held his gaze. "Because I'm not here to manage their dying. I'm here to remind them they're alive." Richard stared at her. "You don't know anything about my children. I know they're 6. I know they're twins. I know they're running out of time." She paused. "And I know their father hasn't been in their room in over a week." The air in the room changed. Richard stood slowly. "Who told you that?" "Mrs. Whitfield didn't have to tell me. The nurse's rotation schedule has no blocked time for family visits. Your children's room has 1 chair and it's pushed against the wall like nobody's used it. Get out." "Mr. Calloway." "I said get out. You walk into my house. You don't know me. You don't know my family, and you think you can—" "I think your children are dying and they're doing it alone." Richard slammed his hand on the desk. "Don't you dare. Fire me if you want, but before you do, answer one question." Grace didn't flinch, didn't step back. "When was the last time you held your son's hand?" Silence. Richard's jaw was clenched so tight the muscle in his cheek twitched. His eyes were burning. Not from anger, though there was plenty of that. From something deeper, something he'd buried so far down, he thought it was gone. "The medical wing is restricted," he said, his voice low and controlled. "My children need rest. You will not enter that wing without my explicit permission. You will not interfere with their care. You will not give them false hope. Is that clear?" Grace nodded once. "Perfectly. Mrs. Whitfield will show you your quarters." Grace turned to leave. At the door she stopped. "Mr. Calloway." "What?" "Dying children don't need quiet. They need someone who still believes they're worth fighting for." She left. Richard stood alone in his office, his hands still flat on the desk, his heart hammering. He told himself she was nobody, unqualified, arrogant. He'd give her 2 days, 3 at most, and she'd be gone like the rest. But her words stayed. "When was the last time you held your son's hand?" He couldn't remember. Mrs. Whitfield walked Grace through the house. The older woman moved briskly, her lips pressed into a thin line. "The medical wing is the east corridor. 3 nurses rotate in 8-hour shifts. Dr. Chambers visits every Thursday. The children's meals are prepared by the kitchen, though—" She paused. "Marcus hasn't eaten solid food in 6 days. Elena picks at broth." Grace listened without interrupting. "The staff doesn't go in unless necessary." Mrs. Whitfield continued. "Mr. Calloway's orders. He wants them undisturbed." "Undisturbed?" Grace repeated. Mrs. Whitfield stopped walking. She turned to Grace, and for the first time, her professional mask slipped. "Miss Mbeki, I've worked in this house for 14 years. I was here when Mrs. Calloway was alive. I was here when she died. I watched those children go from running through these halls to lying in hospital beds, and I've watched their father, a man who used to carry them on his shoulders, become someone who can't even open their door." Her voice cracked just slightly. "This house is waiting to bury 2 children. If you're here for the paycheck, leave now. If you're here for anything else—" She shook her head. "I don't know what to tell you." Grace put her hand on Mrs. Whitfield's arm. "I'm here because I know what it sounds like when a house gives up, and I know what it takes to make it fight again." Mrs. Whitfield searched her face. Whatever she saw there, it made her exhale like she'd been holding her breath for months. "Their names are Elena and Marcus," she said quietly. "Elena likes butterflies. Marcus used to love baseball. Before." "Before," Grace said. "Before everything." Grace nodded. "Thank you, Mrs. Whitfield." The older woman watched her walk toward the east corridor. Under her breath, so quiet Grace couldn't hear, she whispered, "God help us all." Grace pushed open the door to the medical wing. 2 beds, machines, the sharp smell of antiseptic, and something else underneath it, the smell of surrender. Everything was white. The curtains were drawn. The only light came from the monitors. A nurse, young, blonde, exhausted, looked up from her station. "Can I help you?" "I'm the new caretaker." The nurse's eyebrows rose. "Another one." She shook her head. "Good luck." Marcus threw a water cup at the last one. Grace walked to Elena's bed first. The girl lay still, her bald head small against the pillow, her breathing shallow. Grace pulled a chair close, not the one against the wall, a different one closer, and sat down. She didn't check monitors, didn't read charts. She just sat. After a few minutes, Elena's eyes opened. Slow, heavy, like even that took effort. She looked at Grace. No surprise, no curiosity, just the blank stare of a child who'd seen too many strangers come and go. "Who are you?" she whispered. "My name's Grace." "Are you a new nurse?" "No." "Then what are you?" Grace leaned forward slightly. "I'm someone who's staying." Elena studied her. "Everyone says that." "I know." "Then they leave." "I know that too." Elena was quiet. Then, "Marcus won't talk to you. He doesn't talk to anyone anymore." Grace glanced at the other bed. Marcus lay facing the wall, rigid awake. She could tell by his breathing, too fast, too deliberate. He was listening to every word. "That's okay," Grace said. "I'm not going anywhere. He can talk when he's ready." Elena's eyes filled with tears. "Are we going to die?" Grace didn't look away, didn't flinch. "You're alive right now, Elena. Right now. And that's where we start." "The doctor said..." "I know what the doctor said, but I'm not a doctor. And I'm not here to talk about dying. I'm here to talk about tomorrow." "What about tomorrow?" "It's coming, and I'm going to be here for it, and the day after that, and the day after that." Elena's lip trembled. "Promise?" Grace took her hand, bare, no gloves, skin to skin. "Promise." A small sound from the other bed. Not a word. Not a cry. Just a sharp intake of breath. Marcus had heard. He didn't turn around, but his shoulders loosened just barely, like something inside him had unclenched. Grace noticed. She didn't push. She just held Elena's hand and sat in the silence. The nurse at the station watched all of this. She'd seen 5 caretakers come through this wing in the past 4 months. None of them had lasted. Most barely made it past the first night. But something about this woman, the way she sat, the way she held that child's hand like it was the most important thing in the world, made the nurse set down her clipboard and just watch. That first night, Grace didn't leave. She sat in the chair between the 2 beds, the lights dimmed, the monitors casting soft green shadows across the room. Elena had fallen asleep around 9, her hand still reaching toward Grace's chair. Marcus hadn't moved, hadn't spoken. But he was awake. Grace could feel it. She started to hum. Low, soft. An old song. Something her grandmother used to sing in the evenings, when the South Carolina heat broke and the crickets started up. Not a lullaby exactly. More like a conversation with the night. She hummed it through once, then again. On the 3rd time Marcus spoke. "My mom used to sing." Grace didn't stop humming right away. She let the note fade naturally, then said, "Yeah, not that song, a different one, but it sounded like that, like nighttime." "Your mom had good taste." Silence. Then, "She's dead." "I know. She died in a bed like this, in a room like this." Grace's chest tightened. She kept her voice steady. "That must have been the worst thing in the world. Dad won't come in here. He thinks we don't know, but we know. He's scared to watch us die like he watched her." Grace closed her eyes. This 6-year-old boy lying in the dark had figured out what every adult in this house was too afraid to say out loud. "Your dad loves you, Marcus." "Then why doesn't he come?" because sometimes the people who love us most are the ones who are most afraid of losing us. And that fear, it makes them do the wrong thing. Not because they don't care, because they care too much. Marcus was quiet for a long time. Then barely a whisper. I'm tired of people leaving. I'm not leaving. You don't even know us. I know enough. What do you know? I know you haven't eaten in 6 days because you think if you stop trying it'll hurt less when it's over. I know your sister cries every night after the nurses change shift because that's when it gets quiet, and quiet scares her. And I know you're the bravest person in this house, even though nobody's told you that. The silence that followed was different from before. Not empty, full. Marcus turned over. For the first time in 11 days, he faced someone instead of the wall. His eyes were dark, wet, furious, and terrified all at once. Can you really save us? He asked. Grace looked at this small, fierce, dying boy, and she felt something crack open inside her chest. A wound she'd carried for 4 years. A face she saw every night when she closed her eyes. Elijah, her son. Same age, same disease, same question. Can you save me, Mama? She hadn't been able to save him. But she was here now. And these children were alive. And as long as they were alive, she would fight. I can't promise you forever, Marcus, she said. But I can promise you tomorrow, and the day after that I'll promise it again. Marcus stared at her. Then he did something no one in the Calloway house had seen in weeks. He reached out his hand. Grace took it and held it. And in the darkness of that room, between the beeping of machines and the breathing of 2 dying children, Grace and Becky whispered a prayer so quiet, even God had to lean in to hear it. I couldn't save you, Elijah. But I swear on everything I am, I will save them. Outside, the Connecticut wind pressed against the windows. The house was dark. The staff had gone to bed. Richard Calloway sat alone in his office, staring at a photograph of Catherine and the twins taken the summer before the diagnosis. They were at the beach. Everyone was laughing. He pressed his thumb against the glass over Catherine's face. I'm losing them, he said to no one. I'm losing them, and I can't stop it. 2 floors below, in a room he couldn't bring himself to enter, his children slept. And beside them, a woman who had buried her own child held their hands through the darkness and refused to let go. The house was still waiting to die. But for the first time in months, something else had walked through the door. Something that didn't have a name yet. Something that felt impossibly like the beginning. Grace was up before the sun. She moved through the kitchen, quietly opening cabinets, pulling out ingredients. Mrs. Whitfield found her at 6:15 a.m., standing at the stove with a pan of scrambled eggs and a plate of toast cut into triangles. What are you doing? Making breakfast. The kitchen staff handles the children's meals. The kitchen staff stopped making children's meals a week ago. Grace didn't say it with accusation, just fact. Elena likes her toast with butter and a little cinnamon. Marcus won't eat eggs unless they're scrambled soft with cheese. Mrs. Whitfield blinked. How do you know that? Elena told me last night. She talks more than people think. She just needs someone to ask. Grace carried the tray down the east corridor. The morning nurse, a woman named Janet, who'd been on rotation for 3 weeks, looked up from her station with tired eyes. They won't eat. I've been trying. Mind if I try? Janet shrugged. Be my guest. Grace walked in and set the tray on the small table between the beds. She didn't announce it, didn't coax. She just pulled back the curtains. Light flooded the room. Elena flinched. Marcus didn't move. What are you doing? Janet called from the doorway. Letting in the morning. The curtains stay closed. Mr. Calloway's orders. The light bothers them. The dark bothers them more. Grace tied the curtains back. Elena, I brought you toast, the way you like it. Elena opened her eyes, squinting against the unfamiliar brightness. She looked at the toast, then at Grace. You remembered the cinnamon. I remembered. Elena reached for a triangle. Her hand was shaking. She took a small bite, chewed slowly, and swallowed. Then another bite. Janet stared. She'd been trying to get that girl to eat for 3 days. Grace turned to Marcus. He was facing the wall again, but his body was less rigid than yesterday. She set a plate on his bedside table. Eggs are there when you want them, no rush. She sat down, picked up a hairbrush from the shelf, and held it like a microphone. Then she started singing. Badly, on purpose. Some old Motown song with half the words wrong and all of the feeling right. Elena stopped mid-bite. Her eyes went wide. Then something happened that hadn't happened in that room in months. She smiled. "You're a terrible singer," Elena said. "The worst." Grace agreed and kept going louder, now hitting notes that didn't exist. Elena giggled. Weak, fragile, but real. A sound like a window cracking open in a house that had been sealed shut. From the other bed, Marcus turned his head. Not all the way, just enough to see. His eyes found the plate of eggs. He stared at it for a long time. Then he reached out and took a bite. Grace saw it. She didn't react, didn't celebrate, didn't make it a moment. She just kept singing her terrible song and let the boy eat in peace. Janet watched all of this from the doorway. She pulled out her phone and texted Dr. Chambers. "Something's different today. Both kids ate. The new caretaker is either crazy or a miracle worker." Chambers texted back, "Keep me posted." By 9 a.m., Grace had Elena sitting up in bed working on a drawing. Butterflies, Mrs. Whitfield had mentioned she liked them. Grace had found paper and crayons in a storage closet and brought them in. "Make me the most beautiful butterfly you can," Grace said. "I can't draw good anymore," Elena said, looking at her trembling hands. "My fingers don't work right." "Then we'll make wobbly butterflies. Wobbly butterflies are the best kind. It means they've been through a storm and they're still flying." Elena looked at her. Then she picked up a crayon and started drawing. Marcus watched from his bed. He didn't ask for crayons. But when Grace left one on his table, a blue one, casually like she'd set it down by accident, she came back 20 minutes later to find him holding it, rolling it between his fingers. He didn't draw. Not yet. But he was holding it. That was enough. Richard found out about the curtains at 10 a.m. He came down the east corridor and stopped dead when he saw the light pouring from the medical wing. He pushed the door open. What happened to the curtains? Grace was sitting beside Elena, admiring her butterfly drawing. She looked up. "Good morning, Mr. Calloway." "The curtains. I gave specific instructions." "You did. But your daughter drew this butterfly, and she needed the light to pick the right colors." Richard looked at Elena. She was holding up a piece of paper with a lopsided purple butterfly on it. Her eyes were brighter than he'd seen them in weeks. "Daddy, look. Miss Grace says wobbly butterflies are the best kind." Richard's chest tightened. He opened his mouth to argue about the curtains, but the word "daddy" had knocked something loose inside him. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," he said. His voice came out rough. He turned to Grace. His jaw was set. "I need to speak with you. Outside." Grace followed him into the hallway. Richard closed the door behind them and turned on her. "I told you the medical wing was restricted. I'm the caretaker. I'm taking care of them. You're not a nurse. You're not a doctor. You opened the curtains without permission. You brought in food the kitchen didn't prepare, and you're disrupting their rest." "They've been resting for months, Mr. Calloway. Resting is all they've been doing, and they're still dying." Richard stepped closer. "You don't get to make those decisions." "Then who does? Because right now your daughter ate breakfast for the first time in 4 days. Your son ate eggs. He hasn't eaten solid food in almost a week. So if you want to close those curtains and put them back in the dark, go ahead. But you'll do it yourself." Richard stared at her. The anger in his chest was white hot. This woman, no credentials, no authority, standing in his house, telling him how to care for his own children. "You have no idea what you're dealing with," he said. I know exactly what I'm dealing with. 2 children who are sick, scared, and lonely, and a father who loves them so much he can't be in the same room with them. That's not. When was the last time you sat with them, not checked on them, not stood in the doorway, sat with them? Richard's jaw clenched. You don't know what it's like. I know what it costs. Believe me, I know. Something shifted in Grace's eyes, a flash of pain so deep it had its own gravity. She caught it, pulled it back. But they need you, Mr. Calloway. Not your money, not your doctors. You. Richard pointed at her. The curtains stay open today. But if my children get worse, if anything happens because of your little experiment, you're gone. Understood. Understood. He turned and walked away. His hands were shaking. Not from anger. From the fact that she was right, and he knew it. Grace went back inside. Elena was still drawing. Marcus had put down the blue crayon, but there was a small mark on his paper, just a line short and deliberate. The beginning of something. Grace sat down between the beds and started telling a story. Not from a book. From memory. A story her grandmother used to tell about a bird that forgot how to sing and had to learn all over again by listening to the rain. Elena listened with wide eyes. Marcus pretended not to listen, but he turned over facing the room instead of the wall. By noon, Elena had drawn 4 butterflies. Marcus had drawn a single blue line that Grace quietly decided was the most important piece of art in the house. Dr. Chambers arrived for his Thursday visit at 2 p.m. He walked into the medical wing and stopped. The curtains were open. There were drawings taped to the wall. Elena was propped up in bed talking to Grace about what kind of cake she wanted for her birthday. Chambers pulled out his stethoscope and examined Elena first. He listened to her chest, checked her lymph nodes, looked in her eyes. Then he moved to Marcus, who tolerated the examination in silence, but didn't fight it. Chambers stepped into the hallway. Richard was waiting. Well, her breathing is slightly improved. His appetite returning is significant. Malnutrition was accelerating the decline. Chambers shook his head. It's not a miracle, Richard, but something's shifting. What do you mean shifting? I mean their bodies are responding to something. Cortisol levels are down. Sleep patterns are better. Elena's oxygen saturation has improved 2 points since Monday. He paused. None of this is treatment, but stress suppresses the immune system. If you reduce stress, you're telling me a woman singing bad Motown is better medicine than the $8 million I spent at the Mayo Clinic. Chambers looked him in the eye. I'm telling you that your children were dying faster because they'd given up. And somehow she's making them want to stay. Don't underestimate what that's worth. Richard leaned against the wall. This is insane. Maybe. But their numbers don't lie. Whatever she's doing, let her do it. Chambers left. Richard stood in the hallway for a long time, listening to Grace's voice through the door, telling his children about a bird that learned to sing from the rain. Over the next 2 days, the house began to change. Not dramatically, not all at once, but like ice cracking in early spring, slow, then sudden. Grace showed up every morning at 7. She opened the curtains, brought breakfast, sat with the twins. She didn't follow protocols. She didn't fill out charts. She just showed up and refused to treat them like dying children. She talked to Elena about butterflies, about colors, about what she wanted to be when she grew up. Elena said she wanted to be a painter. Grace said that was perfect because the world needed more people who could make something beautiful out of nothing. She didn't push Marcus. She left crayons on his table. She told stories within earshot. She hummed while she folded blankets. And slowly, like a door opening 1 inch at a time, Marcus started turning toward her. On the 3rd morning, he asked her a question. Why do you hum that song? My grandmother taught it to me. She used to say music was the only thing that could get into places words couldn't reach. What does that mean? It means sometimes when your heart is locked up tight, a song can slip through the cracks. Marcus thought about that. Then he said, Can you teach me? Grace hummed the first few notes. Marcus listened. Then in a voice so small it barely existed, he hummed along. Off-key, halting, but he did it. Elena heard it from her bed. Her eyes went wide. Marcus is singing. I'm not singing. I'm humming. There's a difference. You're making music, Grace said. That's what matters. That night, Grace was folding blankets in the hallway when she heard footsteps. Richard stood at the end of the corridor, still in his suit, his tie loosened. They ate dinner, he said, like he couldn't believe it. Both of them. The nurse said Marcus asked for seconds. Grace nodded. He did. Richard walked closer. How are you doing this? I'm not doing anything, Mr. Calloway. I'm just here. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have. She set down a blanket. Your children aren't machines. You can't fix them with money and medicine alone. They need to feel like they matter, not as patients, not as a diagnosis, but as people. I know they matter. Then show them. Richard's face tightened. I'm doing everything I can. You're doing everything you can from your office, from the phone, from a distance. Grace's voice was gentle, but it didn't bend. When was the last time you drew a picture with your daughter? When was the last time you sat next to your son and just let him be quiet with you? You don't understand what it's like to walk into that room. Tell me. Richard's voice dropped. Every time I see them in those beds, I see Catherine. I see her face at the end. I see what's coming and I can't do it again. So you don't go in. I can't. You can. You're choosing not to. And I understand why I do. But your children don't understand why. All they know is their mother died and now their father won't come near them. Richard flinched like she'd slapped him. Marcus told me something last night, Grace said quietly. He said Dad's scared to watch us die like he watched Mom. He's 6 years old, Mr. Calloway, and he figured out what every adult in this house is too afraid to say. Richard pressed his hand against the wall. His breathing was unsteady. What do you want from me? 5 minutes. Tomorrow morning. Just come in, sit down, and be their father. Not a billionaire. Not a man with a plan. Just their dad. And if I can't do it, you can. I've seen you stand outside that door every night. You want to go in. You just need someone to tell you it's okay. Richard stared at her. This woman, this stranger, could see straight through him. Through the suits, the money, the walls he'd built so high, he couldn't climb over them himself. 5 minutes, he said. 5 minutes. He nodded once and walked away. Grace watched him go, then leaned against the wall and exhaled. Her hands were trembling. She pressed them flat against her legs to stop the shaking. Because what she hadn't told Richard, what she hadn't told anyone, was that every time she walked into that room, she saw Elijah. Every time she held Elena's hand, she felt her son's fingers. Every time Marcus hummed that song, she heard Elijah's voice asking her to sing one more time, just one more, Mama. She carried that boy with her into every room, every conversation, every night spent in the chair between those beds. And it broke her heart over and over again in ways she'd never let anyone see. She wiped her eyes, picked up the blankets, and walked back toward the medical wing. Tomorrow. 5 minutes. It was a start. The next morning, Richard appeared in the doorway of the medical wing at 7:30 a.m. He wore no suit, no tie, just a cotton shirt and pants like a man who'd stripped off his armor and didn't know what to do without it. Grace was already there helping Elena with a new drawing. She looked up, caught his eye, and gave the smallest nod. Elena saw him. Daddy. Hey, sweetheart. You came in. 3 words. They hit Richard like a freight train. His daughter, his dying daughter, was surprised to see her own father walk into her room. I came in, he said. He walked to her bed, slowly, like the floor might give way under him. He pulled the chair from against the wall, the chair no one had used, and sat down beside her. Elena stared at him. Then she held up her drawing. I made a butterfly. Miss Grace says wobbly ones are the best. It's perfect, Richard said. His voice cracked on the second word. Marcus was watching. His dark eyes tracked his father's every move. Richard turned to him. "Hey, buddy." Marcus didn't respond, but he didn't turn away either. That was new. Richard sat there. He didn't know what to do with his hands. He didn't know what to say. The machines beeped. His children breathed. Grace folded blankets on the far side of the room, giving him space but staying close. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Then 20. Elena talked. About her butterflies, about how Miss Grace sang terrible songs, about how Marcus hummed now. Richard listened. Really listened. Not with the part of his brain that was calculating treatment costs and survival statistics, but with the part that was just a father sitting with his daughter. Marcus still didn't speak, but at some point during that hour, he reached over to his bedside table, picked up the blue crayon, and drew a line on his paper. Then another. Then another. Richard watched. His son was drawing. Nothing recognizable yet, just lines, but his hand was moving with purpose for the first time in weeks. "What are you making?" Richard asked softly. Marcus didn't look up. "I don't know yet." "That's okay. Sometimes you don't know until it's finished." Marcus paused, looked at his father. Something passed between them, not forgiveness, not understanding, just acknowledgement. "I see you. You see me. We're both here." "Yeah," Marcus said quietly. "Sometimes you don't." Grace turned away so they wouldn't see her cry. That afternoon, she did something that made the entire staff hold their breath. She got the twins into wheelchairs and took them outside. The nurse protested. Mrs. Whitfield wrung her hands. But Grace wrapped them in blankets, tucked hot water bottles against their sides, and wheeled them through the back door into the garden. The fresh air hit them like a revelation. Elena tilted her face toward the sky. Marcus gripped the arms of his wheelchair and looked at the grass like he'd forgotten it existed. "Touch it," Grace said to him. "What?" "The grass. Touch it." Marcus leaned down his thin arm, stretching, and pressed his palm against the ground. Cool, damp, alive. He left his hand there for a long time. Elena reached for a flower growing near the stone path. Her fingers brushed the petals. "It's soft," she said, like she was remembering a word she'd lost. Richard saw them from his office window. His 3 daughters know his twins, and this woman sitting in the garden, touching flowers, feeling the sun. He gripped the edge of his desk and watched. Grace knelt beside Marcus and pointed at something in the grass. A ladybug crawling along a blade. Marcus watched it with the kind of attention only a child can give, total absolute, as if the ladybug was the most important thing in the world. "Did you know ladybugs are good luck?" Grace said. "That's not real." "Maybe not, but it doesn't hurt to believe." Marcus watched the ladybug climb to the tip of the blade and fly away. He followed it with his eyes until it disappeared. "Grace. Yeah. Do you think my mom can see us?" Grace was quiet for a moment. "I think the people we love never really leave. They just find different ways to stay close. Like how? Like ladybugs. Like sunshine on your face when you're not expecting it. Like the feeling you get when someone hums a song you thought you forgot." Marcus looked at her. His eyes were wet, but he didn't cry. "I think she'd like you." Grace's throat tightened. "I think I'd like her too." From the window above, Richard watched Grace put her arm around his son. He pressed his hand against the glass. Below, Grace glanced up. Their eyes met across the distance. She didn't smile, didn't wave. Just held his gaze with that steady, unshakable calm that he was starting to realize wasn't calm at all. It was courage, the kind that only comes from having survived the thing you feared most. He turned away from the window. His chest was tight, his eyes were burning. This woman had walked into his house with nothing, no money, no credentials, no power, and she was doing what $46 billion could not. She was bringing his children back to life, and somewhere in the back of his mind, a thought he'd been fighting for days finally broke through. She wasn't just saving his children, she was saving him. And Richard Calloway, the man who controlled everything, had never been more terrified in his life. Because for the first time since Catherine died, he was starting to believe. And belief, he knew, was the most dangerous thing of all. Because it meant that when the end came, if the end came, the fall would break him in ways that money and distance never could. That night, long after the house had gone quiet, Grace sat in the chair between the beds. Both children were sleeping. Marcus had turned toward the room again, facing out, not the wall. Elena's drawing of a wobbly butterfly was taped to the railing of her bed. Grace reached into her pocket and pulled out a small photograph, creased and faded. A boy. Dark skin, wide smile, wearing a baseball cap 2 sizes too big. Elijah. 5 years old. Taken 3 days before the diagnosis. She pressed the photo against her heart and closed her eyes. "They're fighting, baby," she whispered. "Just like you did. But this time, I'm not going to let go. I promise. Mama's not letting go." The monitors beeped. The children breathed. And in the darkness, Grace and Becky kept watch over 2 lives that the world had given up on, held together by nothing but a promise she'd made to a boy who wasn't there anymore, and a love that absolutely refused to die. Grace told them about the party on a Tuesday morning. She was braiding a silk scarf around Elena's head. Elena had asked for one after seeing Grace wear hers, when she said it casual as anything. "So, your birthday is in 5 days. What kind of cake do you want?" Elena froze. "Birthday. You're turning 7. That's a big deal. We need a cake. We need decorations. We need a plan." Elena looked at her brother. Marcus was sitting up in bed, something he'd started doing on his own 3 days ago, drawing slow, deliberate lines on his paper with the blue crayon. He stopped. "Nobody said anything about our birthday," Elena whispered. "I'm saying something about it now." "But," Elena's voice dropped, "what if we're not here?" Grace took Elena's face in her hands, gently, firmly. "You're here right now, and 5 days from now, you're going to be here with cake on your face and frosting in your hair. That's the plan." Marcus looked up from his drawing. "What kind of cake?" "Whatever kind you want." "Rainbow," Elena said immediately. "Mom used to make rainbow cake." The room went quiet. Grace felt it, the weight of that name, that memory pressing down on everything. "Then rainbow it is," Grace said. Marcus went back to his drawing, but the corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile. Almost. That afternoon, Grace found Mrs. Whitfield in the kitchen and handed her a list. Balloon streamers, cake ingredients, candles, the number 7. Mrs. Whitfield read the list. Her face went pale. "Miss Mbeki, you can't be serious. I need 6 bags of flour, 4 dozen eggs, and food coloring in every shade you can find. Those children might not. Those children are turning 7, and they're going to have a party." Mrs. Whitfield set the list down. Her hands were shaking. "You're going to break their hearts." "Their hearts are already breaking. I'd rather break them with hope than with silence." Mrs. Whitfield stared at her for a long time. Then she picked up the list, folded it, and put it in her pocket. "I'll have the supplies by Thursday." Grace nodded. "Thank you." "Don't thank me," Mrs. Whitfield said. "Pray." Word reached Richard within the hour. He found Grace in the east corridor changing bed linens. He didn't bother with pleasantries. "A birthday party." Grace didn't look up. "Yes." "For children who might die before the candles arrive. For children who are alive right now and deserve to celebrate that." Richard stepped closer. "Do you have any idea what you're doing? You're giving them a countdown, a target, and when they don't make it, when, not if." Richard stopped. Grace set down the linens and faced him. "You've already decided they're going to die, Mr. Calloway. You decided it the day Dr. Chambers gave you 2 weeks. You've been mourning them while they're still breathing. Don't you?" "Elena asked me yesterday if anyone was going to remember her birthday," She said, "Last year, Daddy forgot because Mommy wasn't there to remind him." She wasn't angry. She wasn't sad. She'd just accepted it. Like she's accepted everything else, the needles, the nausea, the fact that her father can barely look at her. Richard's face went white. "That's not fair." "No, it's not. None of this is fair. But that little girl in there wants a rainbow cake because her dead mother used to make one, and I'm going to make sure she gets it. And if she dies the day before, then she dies knowing somebody cared enough to try." Richard opened his mouth, closed it. His eyes were red. He turned and walked away, and Grace listened to his footsteps disappear down the corridor, each one slower than the last. He didn't say yes, but he didn't say no. Grace started preparing that night. She stayed up after the children fell asleep, sitting at the kitchen table, sketching cake designs, planning decorations. She pulled out her own money, $342 from her savings, and ordered what Mrs. Whitfield couldn't get locally. The nurses thought she was delusional. The staff exchanged looks behind her back. But the twins started counting days. 4 more days, Elena said Wednesday morning. 3 more days. Marcus said Thursday at lunch. They said it like a mantra, like a prayer, like the numbers themselves could keep them alive. On Wednesday, Grace wheeled them outside again. The air was colder now, winter creeping in, but she bundled them tight and parked the wheelchairs by the garden wall where the last of the autumn flowers were holding on. Marcus pointed at a bare tree. "That tree's dead." "No, it's not. It's just waiting. Come spring, it'll bloom again." "How do you know?" "Because that's what living things do. They go through the hard part and come out the other side." Marcus looked at her. "Are we living things?" Grace put her hand on his head. "The most alive things I know." That night, Dr. Chambers called Richard with the latest blood work. "I need you to sit down, Richard." "I'm sitting. Talk." "Their counts are improving. Both of them." "How much?" "Enough that I had the lab run it 3 times. Elena's white cell count is up 14%. Marcus's is up 11. Their platelet levels are stabilizing." Richard gripped the phone. "What does that mean?" "It means something is happening that I can't explain with medicine. Their immune systems are responding. The leukemia isn't retreating, but I don't have a word for it. It's hesitating." Hesitating. I know how that sounds. But I've been an oncologist for 22 years, and I've seen this exactly twice. Both times the patients had something the textbooks don't account for. "What?" "A reason to live." Richard was quiet for a long time. Through the phone he could hear Chambers breathing. "The birthday party," Richard said. "She's throwing them a birthday party." "I know, Janet told me." Could that be?" "Richard, I'm a scientist. I don't prescribe birthday cake, but I'm telling you those children are fighting harder than they were 2 weeks ago, and the only thing that's changed is a woman who opens their curtains and makes them laugh. So whatever she's doing, whatever you think about it, let it happen." Richard hung up. He sat in his office staring at the wall. The numbers said his children were dying. But the numbers were also saying they were fighting back. He opened his desk drawer and pulled out a photograph. Catherine. The twins as babies, one in each arm. She was laughing. She was always laughing. "Is this you?" he whispered. "Are you doing this?" No answer. Just the quiet house. Just the distant beeping of monitors. Just the sound of Grace humming somewhere below. 2 days before the birthday, the storm warning started. A nor'easter was moving up the coast, heavy snow, high winds, possible power outages. Mrs. Whitfield brought it to Richard's attention. "Could be bad, sir. They're saying 12 to 18 inches. Get the generators checked. Stock extra fuel. Make sure the medical wing has backup power for 48 hours. "Already done," Richard nodded. Then, almost as an afterthought, "Make sure Grace has everything she needs for the party." Mrs. Whitfield looked at him. A small, careful smile crossed her face. "Yes, sir." The storm hit the night before the birthday. It came faster and harder than anyone expected. By 8 p.m., the wind was howling. By 10 p.m., the snow was falling sideways. By midnight, the power went out. The emergency generator kicked in. The medical wing stayed lit, but barely. The monitors flickered. The house groaned under the weight of the wind. Grace was in her chair between the beds. The twins were sleeping restless from the noise. She pulled their blankets tighter and hummed to keep the fear out of the room. At 12:47 a.m., Marcus woke up. "Grace, I'm here. I feel weird." She touched his forehead. Her hand came away hot. She pressed again, burning. "How weird, sweetheart. My chest hurts, and I'm cold, but I'm sweating." Grace moved fast. She checked his temperature with the bedside thermometer. 103.4. She checked again. 103.8. "Janet!" she called. The nurse came running. Janet took one look at the thermometer and grabbed her phone. "I need to call Dr. Chambers." "Phone's dead," Grace said. "Landline, too. Storm took everything." Janet's face went white. "We need to get him to a hospital. Roads are buried. Nobody's getting in or out tonight." Janet looked at Grace, then at Marcus, then back at Grace. "What do we do?" "We bring his fever down. Cold towels, ice packs, keep him hydrated." They worked together. Cold compresses on his neck, under his arms, on his forehead. Grace held him steady while Janet adjusted the IV drip. Marcus's eyes were glassy. "Grace, I'm scared." "I know, baby. I know. But I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere." His temperature kept climbing. 104.1, 104.6. His breathing went shallow, rapid. Elena woke up. She saw her brother, saw the towels, saw Grace's face. "What's wrong with Marcus?" "He's got a fever. We're helping him." "Is he going to be okay?" Grace looked at this little girl, her wide, terrified eyes, and said the only thing she could. "We're going to fight for him, Elena, as hard as we can." Richard burst through the door. He'd heard the commotion from upstairs. He was barefoot, wearing a t-shirt, his face wild. "What's happening?" "His fever spiked. We can't reach the hospital." Richard grabbed Marcus's hand. It was burning. "Son, Marcus, can you hear me?" Marcus's eyes rolled. He was drifting. "Dad, I'm here. I'm right here." "I don't feel good, Dad." "I know, buddy, I know. We're going to fix this." He turned to Janet. "What do we have? What drugs? What?" "We have antibiotics and fever reducers. But if this is an infection on top of the leukemia, his body can't—" Janet stopped herself. "Can't what? Say it." "His immune system is compromised, Mr. Calloway. If this fever doesn't break, his organs could start shutting down." Richard's face crumbled. He pressed his forehead against his son's hand. "No. No, not now. Not when he was getting better. Not when he was finally—" Marcus's monitor alarm went off. His heart rate was dropping. 72. 65. 58. "He's crashing," Janet said. Grace pushed forward. "Marcus. Marcus, listen to me. You stay here. You hear me. You stay." His eyes fluttered. His lips were turning blue. "Marcus!" Elena screamed from her bed. The heart rate monitor dropped. 50. 44. 38. Then the flat line. One long, continuous tone that filled the room like a scream. "No!" Richard's voice ripped from his chest. He grabbed Marcus's shoulders. "No, no, no! Marcus! Marcus!" Grace shoved Richard aside. She tilted Marcus's head back, started chest compressions. Her hands moved fast, precise counting under her breath. 1, 2, 3, 4. "Come on, baby," she whispered. "Come on, come back." Janet grabbed the ambu bag. Grace compressed. Janet ventilated. Richard stood frozen, his hands shaking, watching his son's small body jolt with each compression. Elena was sobbing. Marcus, wake up. Marcus. 30 seconds. No response. Grace kept going. Breathe, sweetheart. Breathe. Your sister needs you. Your daddy needs you. 1 minute. His lips were blue. His skin was gray. Richard fell to his knees beside the bed. God, please, please, take me. Take anything. Take everything I have, just not him. Please, not him. 90 seconds. Grace's arms were burning. Tears poured down her face, but her hands never stopped. Her count never wavered. Come back, baby. Come back to us. 2 minutes. Janet checked the monitor. Nothing. Flatline. Grace? Janet started. Don't you dare stop. Grace's voice cracked wide open. Not you too, Elijah. She gasped, caught herself. Her hands faltered for half a second, then found the rhythm again. Richard heard it. Through his sobs, through the chaos, he heard that name. A name that didn't belong to anyone in this room. 2 minutes and 30 seconds. Grace was breaking. Her arms shook. Her breath came in ragged sobs. But she kept going. Please, baby. Please come back. Your mama's waiting for your birthday. You promised me, you promised. She wasn't talking to Marcus anymore. She was talking to Elijah. She was back in that hospital room 4 years ago, her hands on her son's chest, begging God for 1 more minute, 1 more breath, 1 more chance. And God had said no. 3 minutes. Janet reached for Grace's arm. Grace, don't touch me. She pressed harder, counted louder. The whole room was crying. Elena, Richard, Janet, everyone. Then a cough, small, wet, barely there, but real. Marcus's chest hitched, his back arched. He coughed again, harder this time, and sucked in a breath that sounded like the first breath a newborn takes. The monitor stuttered, beeped, beeped again. A rhythm, jagged and weak, but a rhythm. He's back, Janet whispered. Oh my God, he's back. Richard lunged forward and pulled Marcus into his arms. The boy was limp, barely conscious, but his heart was beating, and he was breathing, and he was alive. You're here! Richard sobbed into his son's hair. You're still here! Thank God! Thank God! Elena stretched across the gap between the beds and grabbed her brother's hand. Marcus, don't leave me! Don't ever leave me! Marcus's eyes opened. Barely. Just slits. He looked at his sister, then at his father, then at Grace. I heard you, he whispered. His voice was almost nothing. I heard you calling me back. Grace collapsed into the chair. Her entire body was shaking. Her hands were cramped, locked in the shape of compressions. Tears streamed down her face, and she made no move to wipe them. Richard looked at her. Through the tears, through the chaos, through the fear, he looked at this woman who had just pulled his son back from the dead with her bare hands, and he saw it. The crack in her armor. The thing she'd been hiding since the day she walked through his door. You called him Elijah, Richard said. His voice was raw, destroyed. Who is Elijah? Grace covered her mouth with her hand. A sound came out of her, not a word, not a cry. Something deeper than both. Something that had been locked inside her for 4 years. My son. Her voice shattered on the second word. He was 5, leukemia, 4 years ago. The room went still. Even the storm outside seemed to pause. I held him, Grace said. Just like this. I did compressions. I counted. I begged. She was shaking so hard the chair moved beneath her. But he didn't come back. Richard's breath left his body. He stared at her, this woman who had walked into a house full of the same disease that had killed her child, who had held his children's hands. Hummed them to sleep. Fought for their birthday party. Fought for their lives, carrying a grief so enormous it should have destroyed her. You lost your son to the same thing, Richard said slowly, and you came here. You chose to be here." Grace wiped her face with both hands. Because no child should die feeling alone, and no parent should either. She looked at Marcus alive in his father's arms. "I made Elijah a promise. The night he died, I held his hand and I told him I'd never let another child fight without someone beside them. Grace, I couldn't save my boy." Her voice broke again. "But I could show up for yours." Richard reached across the space between them. He took her hand. His grip was tight, desperate, the grip of a man who finally understood. "You saved my son tonight," he said. Grace shook her head. "Love saved him. I just wouldn't let go." They sat there, the four of them, in a room lit by emergency power and shaken by storm, and held on to each other. Richard held Marcus. Elena held her brother's hand. Grace held them all, not with her arms, but with something stronger. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, a boy who had been dead for 3 minutes breathed steadily in his father's arms. A girl gripped her twin's fingers like she could anchor him to the earth. A father wept without shame. And a woman who had buried her own child sat in the darkness and kept her promise. The monitors beeped. Steady. Alive. And the night, for all its fury, could not take what love had decided to keep. The storm broke sometime before dawn. Grace hadn't moved from the chair. Her hands still ached from the compressions, her fingers stiff and swollen, but she kept them resting on the edge of Marcus's bed, close enough to feel the warmth of his arm through the blanket. He was breathing. Steady. Alive. Every few minutes, she checked, not with instruments, just with her hand flat against his back, feeling the rise and fall. Elena had fallen asleep with her arm stretched across the gap between the beds, her fingers curled around her brother's wrist. Even in sleep, she wouldn't let go. Richard sat on the floor. He hadn't moved either. His back was against Marcus's bed frame, his head tilted back, his eyes open. He'd been staring at the ceiling for hours, replaying the flatline, the compressions, Grace's voice breaking on a name that wasn't his son's. Elijah. A 5-year-old boy. Same disease, same fight. Different ending. Richard turned his head and looked at Grace. She was watching the twins sleep, her face quiet, but hollowed out like something essential had been spent, and she was running on whatever was left. Grace. She looked at him. "How long?" he asked. "After Elijah. How long before you could—" He stopped. He didn't know how to finish the question. "Before I could function," Grace said. "About a year. Before I could breathe without it hurting. 2 years." She paused. "Before I stopped hearing his voice every morning asking for cereal? Never. That never stopped." Richard closed his eyes. "Catherine used to sing to them at bedtime. Every night. Same song. After she died, I couldn't. The house went quiet. I let it go quiet because the silence hurt less than the memory." "Silence doesn't hurt less," Grace said. "It just hurts different." "I know that now." They sat together in the dim room. Two people who had buried the people they loved most, finding a language for grief that had no proper words. "I should have been in this room," Richard said. "Every day, every night. I should have been the one sitting in that chair. You're here now. It took my son dying for 3 minutes to get me through the door. It doesn't matter how you got here. It matters that you stayed." Richard looked at Marcus. His son's face was peaceful, his color better than it had been in weeks. The fever had broken around 4 a.m. Janet had checked his vitals every 30 minutes since, and each time she'd looked more confused, more relieved. "I need to ask you something," Richard said, "and I need you to be honest with me." "I'm always honest with you, Mr. Calloway." "Richard." Grace paused. "Richard. Do you think they're going to make it?" Grace was quiet for a long time. Then, "I think they're fighting harder than anyone expected. I think Marcus came back last night because something in him decided he wasn't finished. I think Elena is holding on with both hands because she refuses to let her brother go anywhere without her." She looked at him. "I think they need a reason to keep fighting. And I think that reason is sitting on the floor next to me." Richard's jaw tightened. He pressed his palms against his eyes. I don't know how to do this, Grace. I don't know how to be their father and watch them die at the same time. Then stop watching them die. Start watching them live. It's not that simple. It's exactly that simple. It's the hardest simple thing you'll ever do. Marcus stirred. His eyes opened halfway, unfocused, heavy. Dad. Richard was on his feet instantly. I'm here, buddy. You stayed. I stayed. Marcus looked at him. Really looked, and his eyes filled with tears. I thought I was gone, Dad. I was somewhere dark and I could hear Grace calling me, and I followed her voice back. Richard took his son's face in both hands. You're here. You came back. That's all that matters. Are you going to stay now? Not just tonight. Are you going to stay? Richard felt something inside his chest rearrange itself. Every wall he'd built, every distance he'd maintained, every night, he'd stood outside this door and walked away. All of it collapsed into this one moment, his son's small face between his hands, asking the simplest and most devastating question a child can ask. I'm not going anywhere, Richard said. Not anymore, I promise. Marcus reached up and wrapped his thin arms around his father's neck. Richard held him carefully, afraid of how fragile he was, afraid of how strong this feeling was, afraid of everything, and willing to feel it anyway. Elena woke to find them like that. She didn't say anything. She just slid out of her bed, walked 3 steps on unsteady legs, and climbed onto Marcus's bed. She pressed herself against her father's side, and Richard pulled her in, holding both of them, his face buried between their heads. Grace stood up quietly. She gathered the towels from the night before, straightened the IV line, adjusted a monitor. She moved around the edges of the room, giving them space, doing the work of keeping things running, while a family put itself back together. Mrs. Whitfield appeared in the doorway. She took one look at Richard on the bed with his children, and pressed her hand over her heart. Grace caught her eye and shook her head slightly. Not now. Let them be. Mrs. Whitfield nodded and disappeared. An hour later, the roads were cleared enough for Dr. Chambers to get through. He arrived at 9 a.m., snow still on his coat, and went straight to the medical wing. He examined Marcus first, thoroughly, carefully. He listened to his chest for a long time. He checked his lymph nodes, his reflexes, his eyes. Then he drew blood and handed the vials to Janet. Rush these. I want results by noon. He examined Elena next. Same thoroughness, same silence. When he finished, he stood at the foot of the beds and looked at his clipboard. Then he looked at Richard. Step outside with me. They stood in the hallway. Chambers ran his hand over his face. He arrested last night. Yes. For how long? 3 minutes. Grace did compressions, brought him back. Grace, the caretaker. Yes. Chambers was quiet. Then, his post-arrest vitals are better than his pre-arrest vitals. That shouldn't be possible. His heart sounds stronger. His lungs are clearer. What does that mean? I don't know, Richard. I genuinely don't know. If I put this in a medical journal, they'd think I fabricated the data. And Elena. Elena's numbers have been climbing steadily for a week. Her platelet count is up 30%. Her energy levels are improving. The leukemia is still there, but her body is mounting a response that I can't attribute to any treatment because she isn't receiving any treatment. Richard leaned against the wall. So what do we do? The blood work will tell me more, but my professional opinion right now, for whatever it's worth, is that your children are not following the trajectory I predicted. They're not cured, I want to be clear about that, but they are responding to something, and I think that something is in that room. Grace. Not Grace specifically. What she represents. Purpose. Joy. A reason to wake up tomorrow. The body is a remarkable machine, Richard. When the mind decides to fight, the body follows. I've seen it. Not often, but I've seen it. The blood results came back at 12:30 p.m. Chambers called Richard from his car. Both counts are up. Marcus's white cells have increased 18% since his last draw. Elena's are up 22%. Richard gripped the phone. Say that again. Their immune systems are activating. I'm not calling it remission, we're a long way from that. But this is the first positive trend we've seen since diagnosis. What do I do? You do exactly what you've been doing. Whatever changed in that house, keep doing it. Richard hung up. He stood in the hallway outside the medical wing. Through the door, he could hear Grace's voice. She was telling a story about a fish that swam upstream because someone told it the ocean was the wrong direction. He pushed the door open. Grace looked up. The twins looked up. The blood work came back, Richard said. He was trying to keep his voice level. He was failing. Your numbers are up, both of you. Elena blinked. Is that good? It's very good, sweetheart. Marcus sat up straighter. Does that mean we're getting better? It means your body is fighting. Hard. And it's working. Elena looked at Grace. Miss Grace, did you hear that? Grace smiled. Her eyes were wet. I heard it, baby. Marcus looked at his father. Is the party still happening? Richard laughed. It came out broken and raw, halfway between a laugh and a sob. Yeah, buddy, the party's still happening. Good, Marcus said, because I already know what I'm wishing for. That afternoon, Richard did something he hadn't done in 3 years. He walked into the dining room. This was the room he'd locked after Catherine died. The room where she'd made Sunday pancakes. The room where the twins used to draw pictures while they waited for breakfast crayons. Everywhere flour on the table, Catherine singing off-key at the stove. He stood in the doorway. His hand was on the frame. He could feel the memory pressing against him, not like a weight, but like a wave threatening to pull him under. Grace appeared behind him. She didn't say anything. She just stood there. She was right here, Richard said. Every Sunday, right at that counter. Tell me about her. She couldn't cook. The pancakes were always either burnt or raw in the middle. The kids ate them anyway because she made faces with the chocolate chips. Grace smiled. She sounds wonderful. She was everything. And when she died, I locked this room because I thought if I kept it closed, I could keep her in here. Like preserving a moment. He shook his head. But I didn't preserve anything. I just shut my kids out of the only room that still had their mother in it. He walked in, ran his hand along the counter, pulled out a chair, sat down. We should have the party in here, he said. Grace sat across from him. Are you sure? Catherine would want it. She'd want her kids blowing out candles at this table. His voice cracked. She'd want them to have the rainbow cake. Then we'll make it. You can make a rainbow cake. I can make anything if you give me enough food coloring and bad instructions. Richard laughed again, that broken, beautiful laugh. Grace. Yeah. I owe you more than an apology. I owe you, I don't even know, everything. You don't owe me anything. I was cruel to you, the first day. I tried to shut you out. I fought you on everything I told you. The curtains should stay closed, and the kids should rest, and the party was a bad idea. I was wrong about all of it. You were scared. I was a coward. No. Grace's voice was firm. A coward doesn't sit on the floor of his son's room all night. A coward doesn't hold his children and cry. You were a man in pain, Richard. Pain makes us stupid. But it doesn't make us bad. Richard looked at her across the table. How do you do that? Do what? Carry all that grief, Elijah, everything you went through, and still show up every day with this much love. How do you have anything left to give? Grace was quiet for a moment. Because love isn't a tank that runs empty. It's a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it gets. She paused. Elijah taught me that. He was so sick at the end, so tired, and every morning he'd open his eyes and say, Mama, I love you. Every single morning. Even when he couldn't lift his head, Even on the last day." Her voice trembled. "If a 5-year-old boy who was dying could find the strength to love every single morning, then I don't have any excuse to stop." Richard reached across the table and took her hand. Not like before, not in crisis, not in desperation. This was deliberate, steady. "You're the bravest person I've ever met," he said. Grace shook her head. "I'm just a mother who keeps her promises." They sat there, hands joined across the table where Catherine used to make pancakes, and something settled between them. Not romance, not yet, maybe not ever, but something deeper. Recognition. Two people who had walked through the worst of it and found each other on the other side. The birthday arrived the next morning. Grace was up at 5. Mrs. Whitfield met her in the kitchen, and together they started the cake. 6 layers each, a different color. Red, orange, yellow, green, blue, purple. The frosting was white, thick, and imperfect. Grace wasn't a baker. The layers leaned slightly to the left. One of them cracked, and she patched it with extra frosting. "It's lopsided," Mrs. Whitfield said. "It's perfect," Grace said. Richard came down at 7. He had balloons, 3 bags of them. He'd found them in the storage room the night before and spent an hour blowing them up in his office, his face red, his lungs burning, feeling ridiculous and alive. "Where do these go?" he asked. Grace looked at him. Billionaire captain of industry, standing in the kitchen doorway with an armful of balloons and flour on his nose from an earlier failed attempt to help with the cake, and she laughed. Really laughed. The kind that comes from somewhere deep and takes you by surprise. "Everywhere," she said. "Put them everywhere." He did. He hung them from the ceiling, taped them to chairs, scattered them across the floor. Mrs. Whitfield put up streamers. Janet brought flowers from her car. Even the night nurse who'd gone off shift hours ago stayed to help set the table. At 9 a.m., they brought the twins down. Elena wore a blue dress that Mrs. Whitfield had ordered 3 days ago. It was too big, but Grace had pinned it in the back and tied a ribbon at the waist. Marcus wore a button-down shirt and insisted on doing the buttons himself. It took him 4 minutes. Nobody rushed him. They walked into the dining room and stopped. Elena's hands flew to her mouth. Marcus's eyes went wide. The table was covered in balloons and streamers. The rainbow cake sat in the center, 7 candles glowing. The room that had been locked for 3 years was alive again, filled with color and light and people who loved them. "Happy birthday," Grace said. Elena burst into tears. Not sad tears, joy. Pure, overwhelming, too big for her body joy. She turned to Marcus and grabbed his hand. "Marcus, look at the cake." Marcus stared at it. His jaw was tight, his chin was trembling. "It's rainbow," he said. "Like Mom's." "Like Mom's," Richard said from behind them. His voice was thick. "She'd be so proud of you, both of you." They sat at the table. Richard at the head, the twins on either side, Grace across from him. Mrs. Whitfield served plates. Janet poured juice. The night nurse took photos on her phone. "Make a wish," Grace said. Elena closed her eyes tight. Marcus looked at the candles, then he looked at his father, then at Grace. "I already made mine," he said. "It came true this morning." Richard's chest seized. He bit the inside of his cheek hard enough to taste blood. He would not cry. Not yet. Not until they blew out the candles. "Ready," Elena whispered. "Ready," Marcus said. They leaned in together. Richard leaned with them, his arms around their shoulders, his face between their heads. They blew. All 7 candles went out. The room erupted. Clapping, cheering Mrs. Whitfield dabbing her eyes with a napkin, Janet laughing through tears. The twins grinned at each other, frosting already on Elena's chin from leaning too close to the cake. Richard pulled them both against him. He held them so tight they squirmed. "Dad, you're squishing me." Elena laughed. "Good," he said. "I'm going to squish you every day for the rest of my life." "Promise," Marcus said. Richard kissed the top of his son's bald head. "Promise." Across the table, Grace sat with her hands folded in her lap, tears running silently down her face. She made no move to wipe them. She let them fall, each one carrying something away. Grief guilt. The memory of a birthday. Elijah never had the wish she couldn't grant the promise she could. Richard looked at her across the ruined cake and the scattered balloons and his children's laughter, and he mouthed 2 words. "Thank you." Grace nodded, smiled, and mouthed back, "Happy birthday." After the cake, after the candles, after the twins had exhausted themselves with laughter and sugar and been carried back to their beds, Richard found Grace in the kitchen. She was washing dishes. Her hands were in the soapy water, and she was crying quietly, the kind of crying you do when you think no one is watching. "Grace." She wiped her face quickly with the back of her wrist. "I'm fine, just tired." "You're not fine." She stopped washing. Her shoulders dropped. "Today would have been close to Elijah's birthday too. He'd be 9. Richard walked to the sink and stood beside her. He picked up a towel and started drying the dishes she'd washed. "Tell me about him." Grace smiled through her tears. "He was loud. So loud. He had this laugh that filled up every room. He loved dinosaurs. He wanted to be a paleontologist. He couldn't say the word, he said paleontologist, and I never corrected him because it was too cute. He sounds amazing. He was the best thing I ever did." Grace's voice was barely a whisper now. "And when he died, I thought I died too. For a long time I wanted to." Richard set down the towel. He turned to her. "But you didn't." "No, because the night he died I held his hand and I told him I'd keep going. Not for me. For every kid like him who needed someone to show up." She looked at Richard. "That's why I'm here. That's why I'll always be here." Richard put his arm around her. Not carefully, not hesitantly. He pulled her close and held her, and Grace pressed her face against his shoulder and let herself be held for the first time in 4 years. They stood there in the kitchen, surrounded by cake crumbs and dirty dishes, and the echo of children's laughter. 2 people who had been shattered by the same kind of loss, holding each other up, and somewhere in whatever place love goes when it leaves this world. A little boy named Elijah and a woman named Catherine watched over a house that was finally learning how to live again. The days after the birthday were different, not because the disease disappeared. It didn't. The leukemia was still there, still in their blood, still showing up on every test Dr. Chambers ran. But something had shifted in the house, in the children, in Richard, in the way everyone moved and spoke and breathed. The air itself felt different, like a window had been opened in a room that had been sealed for years. Richard stopped going to his office. Not entirely, he still took calls, still managed the empire that bore his name, but he did it from the chair in the medical wing. His laptop balanced on his knee, his voice low so he wouldn't wake the twins during their afternoon rest. The staff noticed. Mrs. Whitfield noticed. She didn't say anything. She just started bringing 2 cups of tea to the medical wing instead of 1. Grace noticed too. She didn't comment on it either. She just moved her chair slightly to the left to make room for his. They fell into a rhythm. Grace handled the morning's breakfast music stories, the small rituals that had become the architecture of the twins' days. Richard took the afternoons. He read to them badly at first, stumbling over character voices, making Elena giggle and Marcus roll his eyes. He drew with them his clumsy flowers and lopsided suns taped to the wall beside Elena's butterflies and Marcus's blue lines that were slowly, day by day, becoming something recognizable. "What is that?" Richard asked one afternoon, pointing at Marcus's latest drawing. "A house," Marcus said. "It's very blue." "Blue's the best color." "Can't argue with that." Marcus looked at him. "It's our house, Dad, but with the windows open." Richard stared at the drawing. A blue house with every window wide open and something that might have been people standing in the yard. 4 of them. Too big, too small. "Who's that?" Richard pointed to the figures. That's me and Elena. That's you. Marcus paused. And that's Grace. Richard looked at his son. Marcus looked back steady, certain the way only a child can when they've decided something that the adults haven't figured out yet. She's part of our family now, right? Marcus said. Not really a question. Richard glanced across the room. Grace was helping Elena tape a new butterfly to the window. The afternoon light caught her face, and she was laughing at something Elena had said, and Richard felt something shift in his chest, not the crack of grief he'd grown used to, but something warmer. Something that scared him in an entirely different way. Yeah, buddy, he said quietly. I think she is. 2 weeks after the birthday, Dr. Chambers came for a full evaluation. He brought a colleague doctor, Sarah Lynn, a pediatric oncologist from Yale, New Haven, who'd reviewed the twins' file and wanted to see for herself. They spent 3 hours in the medical wing, blood draws, bone marrow samples, imaging the full battery. The twins endured it with a patience that surprised everyone. Elena held Grace's hand through the bone marrow biopsy. Marcus gritted his teeth and stared at the ceiling, but when it was over, he looked at his father and said, "That sucked." And Richard laughed so hard the doctors looked at him like he'd lost his mind. Chambers and Lynn stepped into the hallway. Richard was waiting. Well? Chambers looked at Lynn. She looked at her tablet. Then she looked at Richard. Mr. Calloway, I've been practicing oncology for 16 years. I've seen spontaneous improvements. I've seen patients respond to treatments we didn't expect. What I'm seeing in your children doesn't fit neatly into either category. What does that mean? Their leukemia cells are still present, but their healthy cell production has increased dramatically. Their immune systems are functioning at a level I would not have predicted 3 weeks ago. She looked at Chambers. Dr. Chambers sent me their earlier panels. At that rate of decline, these children should not be sitting up eating solid food and drawing pictures. But they are. They are. And I want to understand why. She paused. I'd like to propose a new treatment protocol. It's aggressive, but given their improved baseline, their bodies might be strong enough to tolerate it now. 3 weeks ago, this wasn't an option. The treatment would have killed them faster than the disease. Richard's legs went weak. He put his hand on the wall. You're saying there's a treatment. I'm saying there's a chance. Their bodies have bought themselves time. How, I'm not entirely sure. But if we act now while they're strong enough, do it. Mr. Calloway, I need you to understand the risks. The protocol is, I understand the risks. Do it. Whatever it costs, whatever it takes. Do it. Lynn nodded. I'll have my team ready by Monday. Chambers waited until Lynn had walked away, then turned to Richard. You know what changed, don't you? Grace. Not just Grace. You. Chambers put his hand on Richard's shoulder. 3 weeks ago, those kids were dying in a dark room with the curtains closed and a father who couldn't walk through the door. Now they're eating, drawing, laughing, and their bodies are responding. Connection isn't just emotional comfort, Richard. It's physiological. You gave them a reason to fight, and their biology followed. Richard pressed his back against the wall and slid down until he was sitting on the floor, right there in the hallway, his head in his hands. I almost let them die alone, he said. If Grace hadn't come. But she did. And you listened. Eventually. Chambers smiled. That counts. Richard told Grace that night. The twins were asleep. They stood on the porch, the cold air sharp against their faces, the last of the snow melting in the garden below. There's a new treatment. Dr. Lynn from Yale. She says their bodies are strong enough now to handle it. Grace's hand went to her chest. When? Monday. Is it going to work? They don't know. But 3 weeks ago there was nothing. No option, no chance. Now there is. Grace was quiet. The wind moved through the bare trees. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell rang. Elijah never got that chance, she said. By the time they found something, he was too weak. Richard turned to her. Grace. I'm not sad. I'm not. She stopped. Her voice was shaking. I'm grateful. That's what this is. I'm grateful that it's not too late for them. Because of you. Because of a lot of things. No. Because of you. You walked through that door when everyone else had given up. You opened the curtains. You sang terrible songs. You made my son eat eggs. You held my daughter's hand. You planned a birthday party with your own money because nobody else believed they'd make it. His voice broke. You brought my children back from the dead, literally. You gave them the strength to survive long enough for this treatment to exist as an option. That's you, Grace. That's all you. Grace looked at him. Her eyes were full. It's not all me, Richard. It's also a man who sat on the floor of his son's room all night. A man who drew clumsy flowers. A man who blew up 3 bags of balloons until his face turned red. Richard laughed through his tears. Those balloons almost killed me. But you did it. For them. Grace took his hand. That's the thing about love, Richard. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be graceful. It just has to show up. He held her hand, tight, like he was afraid to let go. Stay, he said. Not as the caretaker. Not as an employee. Stay because I need you here. The kids need you here. This family needs you. Grace looked at their joined hands. I'm not going anywhere. Promise. She smiled. That same calm, steady, unbreakable smile she'd carried through the door on the first day. Promise. The treatment started on Monday. It was brutal. The protocol hit the twins' hard nausea, fatigue, pain. Marcus threw up for 6 hours straight the first day. Elena couldn't lift her head. The light went out of their eyes, and the house held its breath again, terrified that the progress would unravel. Grace didn't leave the room. She sat between the beds with a cold towel in each hand, wiping their foreheads, holding their hands, talking them through every wave of nausea. I know it hurts, baby. I know, but this is the fight. This is what fighting feels like. Marcus, his face gray, his body shaking, looked at her through hollow eyes. Is this what Elijah went through? Grace's chest tightened. Yes. Was he scared? Yes. Were you? Every second. Marcus gripped her hand. I'm not going to be scared. For him. I'm going to be brave for Elijah. Grace couldn't speak. She just nodded, held his hand tighter, and let the tears fall silently. Richard stayed too. He held Elena when she cried. He cleaned up after Marcus, when the vomiting was too much for the nurses to handle alone. He did the things he'd been too afraid to do before, the ugly, intimate, necessary things that love demands when everything else is stripped away. One night, after a particularly bad round, Elena whispered to him, Daddy, I want to stop. Richard's heart broke. I know, sweetheart. It hurts so much. I know. Can we just stop? Can we just go back to how it was with Grace and the butterflies and the cake? Richard pulled her close. We can't go back, baby. But we can go forward. And forward means getting through this. What if I can't? You can. You're the strongest person I know. Stronger than you. 1,000 times stronger than me. Elena looked up at him. 1,000? 1,000,000. She almost smiled. Almost. Okay, one more day. One more day. They took it one day at a time, one treatment, one recovery, one morning at a time. Grace kept the curtains open. She kept the music playing. She kept the stories going even when the twins were too sick to respond, even when the room smelled like medicine and fear, even when her own heart was breaking with every minute that ticked by. Mrs. Whitfield brought meals. Janet monitored vitals around the clock. Dr. Lynn flew in from New Haven every 3 days to assess the response. After the second week, she called Richard. We're seeing a response. How much? Significant. The leukemia cells are reducing, not gone. I want to be clear, but the trend is undeniable. Their bodies are fighting, and the treatment is working with them instead of against them. Richard sat down. His legs had given out. "Say that again." "The treatment is working, Richard. It's working." He hung up and walked to the medical wing. Grace was reading to the twins something about a fish that swam upstream. Marcus was sleeping. Elena was awake, following along with her eyes. "It's working," Richard said from the doorway. Grace looked up. Elena looked up. "The treatment. It's working. Dr. Lin says their cells are responding." Elena's eyes went wide. "Does that mean we're getting better?" "It means you're winning, sweetheart." Elena turned to Grace. "Miss Grace, we're winning." Grace pulled Elena into her arms and held her. Over Elena's shoulder she looked at Richard. Her face was wet. Her smile was radiant. And in her eyes Richard saw something he'd been afraid to name for weeks. Not just hope. Not just relief. Love. For his children. For this family. For the life they were building together out of the wreckage of everything that had been lost. He walked across the room and knelt beside the bed. He put his arms around both of them, Grace and Elena, and held on. Marcus stirred, opened one eye, saw the huddle, and reached out his arm. Richard pulled him in. The four of them held each other in that small room surrounded by machines and medication, and the evidence of a war they were winning, and nobody spoke, because there were no words big enough for what was happening. They were going to make it. The treatment continued for 3 months. It was the hardest 3 months of their lives. There were setbacks, fevers, infections, nights when the monitors alarmed and everyone rushed in expecting the worst. There were mornings when Marcus couldn't get out of bed, and Elena cried because she missed her hair, and Richard paced the hallway like a caged animal, helpless and furious. But there were also mornings when Marcus ate 3 pancakes and asked for more. Mornings when Elena drew a butterfly with steady hands and no trembling. Mornings when Dr. Lin called with numbers that climbed higher and higher, each one, a small victory in a war that was slowly, unmistakably turning. Grace was there for all of it. Every good day and every bad day. Every midnight crisis and every sunrise recovery. She never wavered, not once. And the twins held on to her like she was the fixed point in a spinning world, the one thing that didn't change when everything else was uncertain. On a Tuesday in March, Dr. Chambers and Dr. Lin arrived together. They examined the twins. They reviewed the labs. They conferred privately for 45 minutes. Then they called Richard and Grace into the hallway. "We need to talk to both of you," Chambers said. Richard's stomach dropped. He reached for Grace's hand without thinking. She took it. Dr. Lin spoke first. "We've completed the full panel. Both children's blood work, bone marrow imaging, everything." And Lin looked at Chambers. Chambers looked at Richard. "Remission," Chambers said. "Both of them. Complete remission." The word hit the air like a bomb. Richard didn't move, didn't breathe. "What?" Grace whispered. "Their bone marrow is clean. Leukemia cells are undetectable. Their healthy cell production is within normal range. Their immune systems are functioning." Lynn paused, and her professional composure cracked just slightly, just enough to show the human underneath. "They're in remission, Mr. Calloway. Your children are going to live." Richard's knees buckled. Grace caught him. He gripped her arm, and she held him upright, both of them shaking, both of them crying, standing in that hallway where 3 months ago he'd been told his children had 2 weeks to live. "You're sure?" Richard's voice was barely audible. "We're sure," Chambers said. And then he did something Richard had never seen him do in 20 years of knowing him. He smiled. Really smiled. "They beat it, Richard. They beat it." Richard turned to Grace. She was sobbing. Not the quiet, controlled tears she usually allowed herself. Real sobs, the kind that come from the deepest place inside you. The place where you keep the things you're most afraid to believe. "They made it," she said. "Oh God, Richard, they made it." He pulled her into his arms and held her. Right there in the hallway in front of the doctors, in front of Janet, who had appeared in the doorway in front of Mrs. Whitfield, who was already crying before anyone said a word. "You did this," he said into her hair. "You did this, Grace." "We did this," she said. All of us. They told the twins together. Richard sat on one bed, Grace on the other. Elena and Marcus looked at them with wide, cautious eyes, the eyes of children who had learned to be careful with hope. "We have news," Richard said. "Dr. Chambers and Dr. Lynn got your results back." "Am I in trouble?" Marcus asked. Richard laughed. He couldn't help it. "No, buddy, you're not in trouble." "Your tests came back clean," Grace said. Her voice was trembling, but her eyes were steady. "Both of you. The leukemia is gone." Silence. Elena stared at her. "Gone. Gone, baby. You're in remission. Both of you." Elena looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at Elena. 6 years old, and they'd spent the last year of their lives preparing to die, and now someone was telling them they were going to live, and neither one of them knew what to do with that information. Marcus spoke first. "So, we're not going to die." "No, sweetheart," Grace said. "You're not going to die. We're going to grow up." Richard's voice broke. "You're going to grow up. I'm going to be 7, and then 8, and then 9, and then—" "All of it," Richard said. "All of it, buddy. Every single year." Elena burst into tears. She threw herself at Grace, wrapping her thin arms around her neck, pressing her face into her shoulder. Miss Grace, we made it." "You made it, baby. You made it." Marcus didn't cry. He climbed off his bed, walked to his father, and stood in front of him. His small face was serious. His eyes were old beyond his years, eyes that had seen too much for a child, that had been dark and closed, and turned toward the wall, and were now open and alive, and looking straight at the man who had almost failed him. "Dad." "Yeah, buddy. You stayed." Richard's composure shattered. He dropped to his knees and pulled his son against his chest. "I stayed, and I'm never leaving again. Not ever." Marcus wrapped his arms around his father's neck and held on. And for the first time since this whole nightmare began, he cried. Not from pain, not from fear, but from relief so enormous his small body didn't know how to contain it. The four of them ended up on one bed, tangled together, laughing and crying and holding on. Grace and Richard on either side. The twins in the middle, a family that had been built not from blood or ceremony, but from the refusal to give up on each other. Janet stood in the doorway, tears streaming down her face, and pulled out her phone. She texted Dr. Chambers. "They know. This house is full of crying. The good kind." Chambers texted back. "About damn time." 5 years later, spring came early to Connecticut. The Graham estate was unrecognizable. The curtains were gone entirely from most windows, replaced with sheer panels that let the light pour through. The garden was wild with color roses, tulips, hyacinths, sunflowers, an explosion of life that Elena tended every Saturday morning with the same patience she brought to her paintings. She was 12 now. Tall, willowy, her hair long and dark, her hands steady. She painted every day, not just butterflies anymore, but landscapes, portraits, abstract pieces that visitors to the house would stare at and ask when she'd started. "I started when I was 6, she'd say, in a hospital bed, with a crayon. Marcus was 12 too, but you'd think he was 15 from the way he carried himself. He was loud, athletic, built like a boy who had decided that every day above ground was a day to use fully. He played baseball on the school team pitcher because of course he was, and he played with a ferocity that made coaches nervous and teammates worship him. He had a scar on his chest from the central line, and he wore it like a badge. "What's that from?" a kid asked him once in the locker room. "I died for 3 minutes when I was 6, Marcus said. "A brave woman brought me back." The kid didn't ask any more questions. Grace stood in the kitchen mixing batter for a rainbow cake. It was her recipe now, she'd perfected it over the years. 6 layers, perfect symmetry. The frosting, thick and white and flawless. She made it every year twice. Once for the twins' birthday, once for Elijah's. Richard walked in, flour already on his shirt from an earlier attempt to help that had gone predictably wrong. They're asking when it's ready, he said. Tell them patience is a virtue. I told them that last year. Marcus said patience is for people who don't have baseball practice at 4. Grace laughed. He's your son. He's our son, Richard said. He said it easily now, naturally, the way you say something that's been true for so long, it doesn't need explaining. Grace was their mother. Not legally at first, but in every way that mattered. She'd been there for every nightmare, every fever scare, every school play, every report card, every argument about bedtime and screen time, and whether Marcus could get a dog. They'd gotten married 2 years ago. Small ceremony. The garden. Mrs. Whitfield officiated because she'd gotten ordained online specifically for the occasion, and no one had the heart to tell her that wasn't quite how it worked. The twins were the best man and maid of honor. Elena designed the invitations. Marcus gave a toast that made every adult in attendance cry. Grace saved our lives, he'd said, standing on a chair because he wasn't tall enough to see over the table yet. She walked into our house when everyone else walked out. She opened the curtains. She made us eat eggs. She taught my dad how to be a dad again. And she brought my brother back from the dead. He'd paused. She brought me back from the dead. I always mix that up. The room had laughed through tears. Grace had buried her face in Richard's shoulder. Richard had held her and thought for the 1,000th time that he didn't deserve any of this, and for the 1,000th time, Grace's voice in his head said, "It's not about deserving, it's about showing up." Now in the kitchen, Richard leaned against the counter and watched Grace work. She moved with a calm efficiency that he'd loved since the first day, no wasted motion, no hesitation, just steady, purposeful grace. Her name had always been right. "You know what today is?" he asked. "Tuesday." "It's the anniversary." Grace's hands paused on the mixing bowl. 5 years. 5 years since you walked through our door. She looked up at him. Her eyes were soft. 5 years since I walked into a dark house with the curtains closed and a man who couldn't look at his own children. And you fixed all of it. I opened the curtains. You did the rest. He reached out and wiped a streak of flour from her cheek. I love you. You know that. I know that. Just checking. The kitchen door slammed open. Elena and Marcus burst in breathless, grass-stained alive, in a way that still made Richard's heart stutter every time he saw it. "Is it ready yet?" Elena asked. "Almost." "You said almost an hour ago," Marcus said, "and I'll say it again in an hour." Marcus groaned. Elena grabbed a spoon and tried to sneak frosting. Grace swatted her hand away. "No previews." "Dad, tell her." "Your mother's kitchen, your mother's rules." Marcus looked at Richard. "You're useless." "I'm the guy who blows up the balloons. Show some respect." Marcus grinned that fierce, bright, full-of-life grin that Grace had fought to put on his face and grabbed Elena's arm. "Come on, I want to show Dad the thing before practice." "What thing?" Richard asked. "Outside. Come on." They pulled him through the back door and into the garden. Grace wiped her hands on her apron and followed. The twins led them to the far corner of the property, past the rose bushes, past the stone wall, to a small tree they'd planted the previous fall. It was a dogwood barely 4 feet tall, its first blossoms just opening in the early spring warmth. Tied to one of the low branches was a ribbon, and hanging from the ribbon a small wooden sign hand-carved. Marcus had done the lettering. Elena had sanded the edges and painted a butterfly in the corner. Richard leaned closer and read the carved words. "For Elijah Mbeki, who taught us that love never dies. It just finds new people to hold." His throat closed. He couldn't speak. He looked at the twins, their faces earnest, watching him. "We wanted to honor him," Elena said. "Grace tells us about him all the time. How he loved dinosaurs. How he couldn't say paleontologist." "Pal-e-on-gist," Marcus said and smiled. Richard turned to Grace. She was standing a few steps behind, her hand over her mouth, tears streaming down her face. But she was smiling, smiling so wide it looked like it might break her. "They wanted to surprise you," Richard said softly. Grace walked forward. She knelt beside the tree and touched the sign with her fingertips, tracing the letters of her son's name. She'd spent 5 years carrying him in her heart, talking to him in the dark, keeping his memory alive through the love she poured into other people's children. And now these children, these fierce, beautiful, impossible children, who had come back from the edge of death, had given him a place in their garden, in their family, in their story. "He's part of us," Elena said, kneeling beside her. "Right, Mom?" Grace pulled Elena into her arms. "He's always been part of us, baby." Marcus knelt too. "Grace. I mean Mom." He still switched between the two sometimes, and Grace loved both equally. "I think about him a lot, about how scared he must have been. And I think the reason you were brave enough to save us was because of him. Because you loved him so much that when you couldn't save him, you decided to save everyone else." Grace looked at this boy, this 12-year-old boy, who had flatlined on a winter night, who had come back from the dead, because she wouldn't stop pressing on his chest, who had grown into someone so perceptive and fierce and full of heart, and she saw Elijah in him. Not his face, not his features, but his spirit. The stubbornness, the bravery, the refusal to go quietly. "You're right," she whispered. "He made me brave enough." Richard pulled all of them together. His arms around his wife, his children pressed between them, standing beside a small tree that carried the name of a boy they'd never met but would always love. They stood there for a long time. The spring air moved through the garden, carrying the scent of new blossoms. A butterfly, a real one, orange and black, landed on the branch just above the sign, rested for a moment, then flew away. Elena gasped. "Did you see that?" "I saw it," Grace said. "That was him," Elena whispered. "That was Elijah." Nobody argued. Nobody needed to. That evening, they gathered around the dining room table, the same table where Catherine used to make Sunday pancakes, the same table that Richard had locked away for 3 years, the same table where 2 dying children had blown out 7 candles on a rainbow cake they weren't supposed to live to see. The cake sat in the center, not for the twins this time, for Grace. Her birthday. "Happy birthday, Mom!" the twins shouted. Grace covered her face, laughing and crying simultaneously, the way she did every year, the way Richard hoped she'd do for 50 more years. Richard raised his glass. The room was full. Mrs. Whitfield, Janet, Dr. Chambers, and his wife, Dr. Lynn, who'd driven up from New Haven, even a few of the twins' school friends and their parents who'd heard the story and wanted to be part of it. 5 years ago, Richard said, a woman walked into our lives when we'd given up. My children were dying. I was hiding. This house was dark and silent and waiting for the end. He paused. His voice was steady, but his eyes were full. She didn't bring medicine. She didn't bring credentials. She brought hope. She opened the curtains. She sang terrible songs. She made a rainbow cake with her own money. She planned a birthday party for children the world said wouldn't make it. He looked at Grace. She taught a man who'd forgotten how to be a father that love isn't about protecting your family from pain. It's about being there while they go through it. She saved my son's life with her bare hands on the worst night of my life. And she did all of it while carrying a grief so deep it would have destroyed anyone else. He raised his glass higher. She lost her son Elijah. And instead of letting that loss swallow her, she turned it into a promise. A promise to never let another child fight alone. A promise to never let another parent forget what matters. His voice broke. She kept that promise. Every single day. She kept it, and she saved us. He looked around the table at Elena's bright eyes. Marcus's fierce grin. Mrs. Whitfield's tears. Chambers's proud nod. To Grace, he said. The bravest person I've ever known. The love of my life. The mother of my children. The woman who did the impossible. To Grace, everyone echoed. Grace closed her eyes. She made a wish, the same wish she'd made every year since Elijah died. The wish she'd whispered into the darkness of hospital rooms and empty apartments and a stranger's mansion in Connecticut. The wish that had carried her through the worst of it and brought her to the best of it. Let my love be enough. Let it be enough. She blew out the candles. When she opened her eyes, Elena was clapping. Marcus was already reaching for the cake. Richard was watching her with an expression that held everything: gratitude, love, awe, the quiet amazement of a man who still couldn't believe his luck. Grace looked around the table, at the faces, at the light, at the open windows and the flowers, and the sound of laughter filling a house that had once been silent as a tomb. This was her promise kept. This was her healing. This was Elijah's legacy. Not a gravestone, not a memory that faded, but a living, breathing, chaotic, beautiful family that existed because a mother's love didn't end when her son's heart stopped. It just grew. It found new hands to hold, new hearts to fill, new children to save. Later that night, after the cake was gone and the guests had left and the twins were in bed, their own beds now in their own rooms, no more hospital wings, no more monitors. Richard and Grace stood on the porch. The stars were bright over Connecticut. The dogwood tree was a shadow in the garden, Elijah's sign catching the moonlight. "Do you think he sees this?" Richard asked quietly. Grace looked up at the sky. "I know he does." "What do you think he'd say?" Grace smiled. "He'd say, 'Mama, can I have some cake?' He'd say that first. And then he'd say, 'You did good.'" Richard took her hand. "You did more than good. We did more than good." They stood there in the quiet, watching the stars, feeling the weight of everything they'd survived and everything that lay ahead. Two people who had been broken by the same kind of loss. Two people who had found each other in the wreckage and built something neither of them thought was possible. "Thank you," Richard said, "for not giving up on us." Grace leaned into him. "Thank you for learning how to stay." The wind moved through the garden. The dogwood swayed. And somewhere between heaven and earth, in the place where love goes when it leaves this world, a little boy named Elijah smiled. Because his mother's love hadn't ended when he died. It had multiplied. It had walked through a stranger's door. It had opened the curtains. It had held two dying children and refused to let go. It had taught a broken father how to love again. It had planned a birthday party that the world said was impossible. It had pressed its hands against a boy's chest and pulled him back from the dead. And now it lived in a house with open windows, in a garden with a dogwood tree and two children who ran through the grass with their hair long and wild, in a father who finally understood that the only thing stronger than fear was showing up anyway. And in a woman, a brave, fierce, unbreakable woman who had proven what the doctors and the money and the machines could not. That love, when it refuses to quit, is the only medicine that has ever truly saved anyone.